Hi. In Vietnam, we continued France's colonial war for decades, tearing society apart at home for pretty much no strategic gain abroad. In Iran, we spent the 1970s sending the brutal Shah's regime billions of dollars of weapons, only for those same weapons to fall into the hands of the Islamic Revolutionary Government in '79, our new and heavily armed worst enemies. Worst enemies that kept propping up over and over again. Enemies that we designed sometimes because they simply wanted to have dignity and sovereignty. The story keeps repeating itself over and over again. We didn't do much better with Iraq. 1980s, arming Saddam before invading and then sanctioning Iraq into destitution. We wielded Iraq as a weapon against Iran as well at that point. All that before we actually invaded and just straight up broke the country in 2003. I can go on and on and on. And we celebrated the fall of the Soviet Union, cheering on its destruction, which plummeted millions and millions of people into an economic disaster, the consequences of which we still see today. At Zohran Mamdani's election victory night party, I was interviewed by a media outlet where I said, we defeated the USSR and the USSR dissolved, unfortunately. This was quite the controversial statement at the time. Fox News still loves repeating this soundbite. And some Democrats also channel that frustration as well. They say, how dare you, Hasan? The USSR was our enemy. They were ruthless, authoritarian. The fall of the USSR was one of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century. Just wait, listen, maybe you'll agree. Not only was there incalculable harm done to every single country under its banner, child prostitution, skyrocketing suicide rates, life expectancy plummeting. But America was no longer contested around the globe. And it is precisely because of the end to that multipolarity that we saw accelerated neoliberalism that is devastating every Western nation right now. Unlimited and unchecked greed. Our successes are leading to our own demise and the demise and collapse of the liberal system. The U.S. has produced disaster after disaster after disaster. I am reminded, however, of some famous words spoken by a guy by the name of Mao Zedong. Speaking with an American journalist in 1946, Mao Zedong said these words: all reactionaries are paper tigers. In appearance, the reactionaries are terrifying. But in reality, they are not so powerful. Speaking of U.S. imperialism, people seem to feel that it is terrifically strong. But it will be proved that the U.S. reactionaries, like all reactionaries in history, do not have much strength. In the United States, there are others who are really strong. The American people. I think about that quote quite a bit, especially in these last couple of weeks as Operation Epstein's Fury wages on. Perhaps Mao was right about this, but maybe he was a little too early. After all, being a leftist is about being right, but too early. I'll revisit that quote in a little bit. I want to talk about another great man, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. You might know him as Lenin. Lenin. It was Lenin who described imperialism as the highest or newest stage of capitalism. Successful imperialist powers, he observed, allowed their citizens to benefit from the exploitation of their colonies. But the system was unstable. The development of imperial economies was uneven. The colonies were a way of sending surplus capital and people into new markets. In the 1960s, Kwame Nkrumah, the African socialist who served as Ghana's first president, updated Lenin's theory with his own book on neocolonialism. What he described was how, in the era of decolonization under American hegemony, colonialism actually endured. Through many different ways, foreigners were still able to dominate notionally independent countries like the Congo or Colombia. To give an example, say an African country nationalizes its oil reserves, but unfortunately, they don't own or operate their own domestic refineries. Or maybe they don't even have domestic refineries at all. Say that African nation decides to take a closer look at the Western capital-backed contracts. What do you think happens? All of a sudden, armed militancy and uprisings prop up, left and right. Instability is born out of nowhere. Now, those militants might not wear a NASCAR jacket that says Shell Corporation, but that doesn't change the reality that those militancies oftentimes are working for the same exact interests. So there's the visible forms of intervention, rendered invisible through the covert actions of the State Department, but then there's the more complex forms of economic imperialism through a financial infrastructure that Western capital has built to benefit its own interests, offering loans through the IMF only to cycle that wealth back to foreign capital. It's one of many ways. Loans that come with tremendous restrictions like austerity. Money that is handed over to developing nations that are only allowed to be spent in ways that generate returns for foreign investors. And to think all of that debt in the third world that is owed to financial institutions in wealthy countries, whether it's Goldman Sachs or the IMF, capital does not go to those who most need it. This has been, with, of course, substantial updates, the system of global exploitation that has endured for decades. And it has been facilitated by the United States, which, after so many disasters, is now running out of energy to hold this system together. There are no more big enemies left that the United States can beat. And after an empire destroys all of its enemies, it turns the gun on itself. After all of this plunder is not necessarily done for you. It's done for parasitic international capital. And parasitic capital has no loyalty to ethnicities, religions, nationalities, but only to the almighty dollar, only to the profit motive. Although critics have been pointing out the decline of American imperial power for decades, I'm certainly one of those critics, we've never seen the decline happen so quickly. And we have never had this much obvious evidence for it. The mini-Trumps around the world, like Viktor Orban, they're not doing so hot. They're not